Hello again, everybody. I'm Happy Caldwell, and thank you for joining me for today's edition of Arkansas Alive. All week, my topic has been, Lord, what do I do? How to make right decisions. And I believe that some of the things we've already covered have been a blessing to you, but I want to conclude the week's broadcast with giving you some examples and some suggestions on how to stay financially prosperous, healthy, so you can fulfill God's plan for your life. I know there have been things that have been misapplied and misstated, abused where this topic is concerned, but I believe you will hear the Spirit of God and the truth of God's Word to keep you on the right track. So stay tuned. Arkansas Alive starts right now. You know, it really grieves me when I hear that people are having to struggle to make choices in this very inflationary culture that we're in right now. Parents are having to make choices about children. People are cutting cords, they're cutting expenses, and they're trying to make it. And it grieves me. And I know some people are struggling with, what do I do about the pledges that I've made to the Lord? And do I keep those, or does He understand what I'm going through? Well, He definitely understands what you're going through. But He says in His Word, He says you need to keep your vows. And what I'm here today, all this week, is to show you what the Word says about the situation, how to get on the Word, stand on the Word, and see God rescue you and deliver you out of the fear and the anxiety and the lack, and at the same time, keep your vow to Him. And in fact, this program today, I want to offer you a copy of my book, God's Purpose for Wealth. And I wrote this some time ago because I'd heard so many, abusive messages on prosperity. I wanted you to know the purpose for wealth. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's not, my name is Jimmy, I'll take all you give me. It's why are we supposed to prosper? There's a purpose in this. And stay tuned to the end of the broadcast. I think we have a commercial spot that will show you about how to get your copy. But let's go back to Kings. And I want to close out this week with giving you some suggestions about how to rightly divide where your money's going. How do I do this? How do I save here? How do I meet this need? God will supply your need according to His riches and glory. He's not short-handed, but you have to follow His word and His example. And as I've already taught, opening the windows of heaven with the tithe is the first step. Not many people teach that anymore. Pastors don't teach it because they're afraid of what the congregation will think or do or not do. I know my son attends a church in Nashville, Tennessee. That's where he lives. And he said, Dad, in our church, the tithe is never mentioned. Nobody ever talks about it. Nobody uses the word tithe. He said it's not taught. Well, our son was raised under the scriptural admonition to bring your tithes into the storehouse. But I know other places, They don't teach tithing because they're afraid. And then there are people that don't want to hear about tithing because they think it's nobody's business, or that's Old Testament, it doesn't relate to us anymore. It does relate to you and relates to all of us. Jesus talked about it in Matthew 23:23. And He said, don't leave the tithe undone. We are to continue to worship God with the tithe, the 10% of increase. We're to sow seed. We're to sow offerings. I was listening to Andrew Womack right here on VTN the other day. I've known Andrew for many, many years now, and I've taught in his Bible school for 10 years, the third-year ministry students I teach the heart of the pastor for third-year ministry students that are going to be pastors. And he said that he was reading, he loves history, and he was reading stuff on previous generations, back in the 1700s, I think it was. You may have heard him say this. And he said, I was so fascinated and blessed by the way they wrote and the way they spoke and the way they addressed issues. And he said their eloquence was unmatched. And you could tell these were deep thinkers, and they were educated people. But I mean, back in the 1700s, and and he said, but I was wondering, why don't we write and talk like that today? Why don't we teach people these concepts, and why don't we demand of our schools to raise and teach and produce more educated, eloquent people? It seems like that we approach everybody in this age today, television, social media, on a third, fourth, sixth grade level. Commercials, TV programs. I mean, it's a dumbing down of the culture. And Andrew was saying, why don't people today talk like these people in the 1700s? I mean, they didn't have television, they didn't have social media, they didn't have computer, they didn't even have electricity. So what's the problem today? We have dumbed down our culture to the point where there's no incentive to be a craftsman. I know when we were building our last house, and I believe it's going to be our last house. We built 3, and I'm fine with where we are. I don't want to build another house. And we were having a spiral staircase that went up to the second floor. And the contractor was a friend of ours, and still is, and he was building the house for us. And he said, I don't know where I'm going to find a carpenter that can do this. He said, today most everything is prefabbed and pre-made and blah, blah, blah. And he said, there aren't any carpenters, any craftsmen around anymore that can make, because every step has to be a different width and size. It's like a fan. And he said, I don't know where I'm going to find somebody. There are no more people around that can do that kind of work. Because the old craftsmen that have retired or died, well, they didn't teach it to the next generation. He said there's nobody left to do this kind of work. And he finally found a man that had retired that did that kind of work and knew what to do. And he asked him to come out and take a look at it, which he did. And he agreed to do it. I think the man's probably passed away by now, because that was 25 years ago. But he built this staircase, and it's a spiral. It's not a large staircase, but it just goes up to the second level in a curve. And Andrew was saying, why don't we have people that talk and are educated and can write and whatever, like they did in the 17th century. I mean, students today graduate from high school and college and can't even read. It's something that we need to consider. Why can't we have eloquence and teaching and reading and art and so forth? If you go overseas in Europe and go to some of the older countries, and you go to some of the houses, the estates, the castles, it's amazing, but you can't build anything like that today. And they built it without power tools and forklifts or anything like that. They built everything by hand, because we don't teach that anymore. We don't demand of people that anymore. We've been taught to accept whatever and accept the cheapest and the least and so forth. Well, God hasn't changed. And when we begin to realize that God has a purpose for us to prosper, you know, there's been a lot of criticism about prosperity from, you know, a church's perspective or preachers or Christians' perspective. They don't have any problem with the drug dealer. They don't have any problem with other ways or other people. But I remember, and I saw an ad for this the other day, and I thought, you know, I have those books. These were books that were written. Now listen to this, and this is not a advertisement or a promotion or an endorsement. But I have these books, and one of them is Why We Want You Rich. That's the title of the book. Why We Want You Rich. You know who the authors were, the co-authors? Donald Trump and Robert Kiyosaki. Robert Kiyosaki and Donald Trump wrote this book, probably 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago. Why We Want You Rich. And I got the book and I read it. Well, I'd say it's probably maybe longer than that, maybe 30 years ago. Why We Want You Rich. And they tell you the reason that they want you rich is because we're losing the middle class. The middle class is the most taxed class of beings. You've got three classes in America. You used to have three classes throughout the world, but you only have two now, rich and poor. The middle class has been just about taxed to death. And they were saying, we want you to be rich because if we lose the middle class, we become a two-class nation, rich and poor. So the middle class has been taxed to death, and yet they're the ones that pay all the taxes and they do all the work. So they were trying to get people to come up from the poor and come into the middle class. And then there was another book that I read, and I saw this on the book stand and got it, and it was also about 20 years ago, by Leah Iacocca, who you may know as the president of, I'm not up on my car, Chrysler Motor Corporation, Chrysler cars. And he helped develop, if you read his life history, he helped develop the Mustang. He helped develop a lot of well-known cars. But Chrysler hired him to get them out of debt and to get them from going under. And so he rebuilt Chrysler and made it a Fortune 500 company. And the title of his book was Where Have All the Leaders Gone? And he spent the entire book explaining why we have lost our leaders and what it's done to our country. And he relates in there was one particular young man that was working for an automobile company, and he said the standard procedure has always been to give incentives to sell the cars. You know, car dealers and motor companies have acres and acres of cars that have not sold. And now we're faced with electric vehicles who nobody wants, but the government's forcing everybody, pushing them to green, whatever. And they are trying to figure out how to move all these cars. And so this one young man, they worked for a car manufacturer. He said, you know what we've done is we have given all of our incentives, rebates, cash bonus, whatever, we've given all of those to the dealerships. Now, this was a transition. You think back what I'm about to say. We've given all of the bonuses, the incentives, the discounts. We've given all of that to our dealers to sell the car to our dealerships. But the dealerships can't move them off the lots to the consumer, and therefore they can't buy any new cars because they haven't sold the old ones. And we keep giving the discounts. Now, this young man made his point very well. And they said, okay, what are you proposing? They said, well, why don't we skip the dealership, go around the dealership, and give the discounts directly to the consumer? Ha! A light goes on. Let's quit giving the incentives and the discounts to the dealership. Let's start giving them to the people, to the consumer, to the guy that wants to buy that pickup truck. Give him the 10% discount. Give him the 20% discount. Give him whatever he needs so he can buy the car from the dealer, and you'll solve your problem. And they did. They started doing that years ago. And you see the ads on TV. If you buy this car, they'll give you $1,000, $2,000 cash back or cash discount. So the dealers moved the cars to the consumers because the consumer was getting the discount. And so they killed two birds with one stone, because then the manufacturer could make more cars and send them to the dealership, because they're moving the cars, because they're giving the incentive to the giving the incentive to the dealer. Well, Lee Iacocca's book, Where Have All the Leaders Gone? And he talks about leadership and how it has deteriorated so. Now, I'm imagining all of this from a biblical perspective, a Christian perspective, a pastor's perspective. And then Robert Kiyosaki and Donald Trump write a book called Why We Want You Rich. Now, the consuming secular world buys them up. Man, they want to know. But the Christians refuse it. They turn it down. When television was invented, I was 10 years old before I ever saw a television set. When television was invented and started making its place in the marketplace television, the Christians, by and large, shunned the television set, the television stations, the television industry, the innovation. One-eyed devil, that's what they called it. And there were certain denominations that refused to allow their people to watch television. Like one full gospel church member said we couldn't watch television because the pastor said it was evil, but the pastor had a television set and he was watching it. Well, along comes Dr. Lester Sumrall, and he begins to imprint some of us younger pastors. He said, you boys need to buy up these UHF stations. Nobody wants them. Now, this was 30 plus years ago. You need to buy up these UHF stations because nobody wants them. They're worthless. So we did. We started buying them at pennies on the dollar. And we bought 3 of them and built 3 UHF stations. Well, now the UHF stations are worth more than the VHF stations. Ultra high frequency is more valuable. So now we have all of these Christian television stations, Christian television networks around the world. And what Brother Sumrall was trying to get us to realize is, the devil's out there using the airwaves, but the airwaves belong to God. The prince of the power of the air is the devil, and he's taken over the airwaves. You young pastors and young ministers, you need to get back in the game and take the air back for God. And so, boy, we did all over the country. People were buying TV stations, building TV stations, and Christian television networks began to pop up all over the place. Well, when Kiyosaki and Trump were trying to get people to realize We want you rich so you can not lose the middle class. And then Iacocca was trying to get people to realize, where have all the leaders gone? What's wrong? Well, we've shut God out of just about everything. When Oral Roberts built ORU and then the City of Faith Hospital, I went up there and stayed in the hotel across the street from ORU, and I just stared out the window for 2 days. And I knew Brother Roberts, and he had allowed us to be shown through the City of Faith Hospital. Dr. Winslow was heading it up, and he took us on a tour and showed us what they were doing. 30, 60 floors, 30 floors, 60 floors. I mean, it was amazing. Nobody had ever done it, never been done before. ORU was built in the 60s. Oral Roberts was a visionary plus. And I was just sitting there looking at that City of Faith Hospital and world-class university. And I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, what's going on here? And God said, I've been trying to get in education for years, and nobody would let me in. Oral Roberts let me in. He built a university in my name to teach and train students. I've been trying to get in medicine in the hospitals for years, and nobody would let me in. You know, if you know the story of City of Faith Hospital in Tulsa, the medical community actually blackballed that City of Faith Hospital. They blackballed it to where it never opened because they didn't want competition. Because in the City of Faith Hospital, they not only had a doctor and a nurse, but they had a prayer partner. How many hospitals do you know today that have a doctor, a nurse, and a prayer partner? But Oral Roberts University and City of Faith Hospital had all three. And God told me, he said, Oral's let me in education. Oral has let me in medicine. How many other areas, culture, do you think God wants in? All of them. Now, I'm not talking about kingdom now. I'm not talking about that erroneous kingdom now where we're going to take over the world and then bring Jesus back. I'm not talking about that. But the Bible does say that we are to go into all the world and that we're to preach the gospel to every creature. Well, you know, you heard me and the manager of VTN talk about cutting the cord. You know, if you're paying cable bills and so forth and the millions are jumping out of that, and take that money that you're saving and send it to VTN. Become a partner. There's how you can pay your partner pledge. Redirect monies. You're probably spending money that if you go back and look at everything, you think, hey, I don't need that anymore. Redirect that money to VTN. Or liquidate assets. Assets, the things that are just sitting around in your closet, in your jewelry box, in your garage, in your wherever, and liquidate it, sell it, put that money in the gospel. If you would like a better understanding of how God wants you to prosper financially, I want to ask you to purchase this copy of my book, God's Purpose for Wealth. Watch this, and I'll be right back.
God established wealth as part of His blessing covenant because of His love for us. The very foundation of giving is located in the DNA of God. For God so loved the world that He gave. John 3:16. That is God's DNA. God is love. In Pastor Caldwell's book, God's Purpose for Wealth, he reveals the heart of giving that flows from the very DNA of God. You will gain insight into the importance of becoming covenant-minded and enforcing what the Word has declared belongs to every believer as an heir of God. In this book, you will learn God's intended purpose for your wealth, how to determine what to give, the laws of governing personal increase, and more. To order your copy of God's Purpose for Wealth, call 888-641-3375 or go online to vtntv.com and get your copy today. Learn how to develop the giving heart of God and become an expression of God's love through your giving.
I want to help you. God's Purpose for wealth. So that takes all of the, how would you say, misapplication and misunderstanding and all the hype out of it. Takes out the selfishness. I want to read to you from the table of contents. Establishing God's covenant. You have to give yourself first. How do I determine what to give? What happens when I give? How to increase my faith? The fear of giving. Boy, that's a real big giant that you have to slay. The fear of giving, because you're afraid you won't have. Laws governing personal increase. And this book is designed for you. It's to help you. And you can do and be whatever God called you to be and whatever God called you to do. You just have to be willing to step out in faith and learn God's principles. That's what I've taught you this week. And we need to go to another level. But unfortunately, whenever you mention the word prosperity, people just tighten up. They just shut you out. They just close their ears because they've seen abuse and they've heard the hype and they just don't want any part of it. But you're actually shutting God out by refusing to hear what He says in His Word. The purpose of the prosperity, the purpose of the wealth is so He can establish His covenant. That's the purpose of it. He said in Deuteronomy 18, I give you power to get wealth, that I may establish my covenant. So you're actually helping God. You're being a vessel of God. He's using you to be a blessing in the earth. I guarantee you Satan's got his men and women that are hoarding wealth, but there's going to be a divine transfer. And you are qualified, if you understand the Word, to handle that wealth transfer. Thank you for joining us this week. And I've prayed for you to be able to fulfill your financial commitments to God without suffering. So join me again next time. Remember, Jesus is Lord of Arkansas, and wherever you're watching in the world, too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on X at Happy_Caldwell. VTN is on Roku. Search VTN in the channel store and add us to your lineup. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at VTNTV.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at VTNTV.com.